And interestingly, that you bring up the comparison to the Supreme Court's rulings on education, because in the end, had they said this will be too difficult to deal with in the education system, the patterns are too entrenched, they actually would have been right. You know, history has proven that, in fact, we haven't been able to pull that off. And so it does suggest that, as clear as it is that the criminal justice system has these terrible flaws in it, that the task of actually ridding the system of these biases will be just as difficult and monumental and likely to be defeated again and again, hopefully eventually not, but likely to face setback after setback in the same way that school integration has been largely held back.
Right, but you have to start with a commitment. And I think we made that commitment in education, and it has not been implemented in the way we would like to, but I'm a living witness that it was implemented some. There's a generation of people like me that benefited from being able to go to colleges and universities that were not open to us before Brown. And we made a token engagement in that, and you see some of that in many communities, but there are lots of people, a whole generation of people who responded to that commitment and benefited from that commitment. We haven't made the commitment in the modern era when it comes to criminal justice. And what's especially disappointing to me about that is that the courts have a greater role in enforcing some of these rights than they might have in some other area, more so than in the education area. And if you don't have an institution like the court committed to the rule of law, even when people are against it, then we're not going to make progress. I mean, there was never a time in my community where you could get the majority of people to vote to end Jim Crow. If it was left to the politics of the era, Alabama would still be segregated, Mississippi would still be segregated, Virginia would still be segregated. You wouldn't see the kind of transformation that we've seen in some of these communities. But it took the commitment from the court to say, no, this is unconstitutional, and we're now obligated to enforce that. To move the politics in the right direction. What's troubling to me about what I'm seeing in the criminal justice era is that we haven't made the commitment. The Supreme Court in McCleskey says we're not committed to eliminating racial bias in the administration of the death penalty, which says something really powerful. I think McCleskey is the Dred Scott of our generation. I think it's the Plessy versus Ferguson of the 20th century, late 20th century. And we haven't sounded the alarm bells because I think we've been distracted by the appearance of progress in too many places that don't matter as much as the places where it really matters. And that's in the spaces where people are vulnerable and abused and neglected and at risk. And that's why I think of the criminal justice reform effort. I think of issues like the death penalty as civil rights issues. I do. I don't think you can say I stand with civil rights, I support civil rights, and be indifferent to executing people because they're black and brown.